What is called a Spencer hearing in a horrible case out of Florida involving a man who was convicted of raping and murdering an 8-year-old little girl. The guy that was convicted's name is Donald Smith. We followed this case here on the Law and Crime Network. And the little girl, the little 8-year-old girl, Cherish Periwinkle, her mother addressed the judge today in the sentencing hearing. Let's take a listen.
Honorable Judge Cooper, when I lost Cherish, I lost everything. My life was never going to be the same. I feel nauseous every morning, and there's no cure for the emotional pain inside me. The year after she was taken from me, I screamed and cried every day. I missed the simple things like brushing Cherish's hair and snuggling up on the couch and watching movies with her and her sisters, Destiny and Nevaeh.
It's okay. You can make it.
Cherish loved.
Go ahead, you can do this. Take a deep breath, you can do this.
Cherish loved cooking and enjoyed spending time with me in the kitchen, cooking dinner and making Kool-Aid. Cherish would play school with her little sisters. She would be the teacher and they would be the students. She loved reading to Destiny and Nevaeh, and they would color together for hours. The three of them would play in the rain with their umbrellas while I watched from the front porch. We all enjoyed playing hide and seek in the house together as a family. Cherish's birthday is Christmas Eve. That day in the holiday season will never again be a time of joy or celebration. When other people are celebrating Christmas Eve, to them it is Christmas Eve, but in my mind it will always be Cherish's birthday. Cherish used to believe Christmas was a celebration of her birthday, and all the fuss was for her, but Cherish would share her day with her sisters, and they would all get to open one present on Christmas Eve. Since she was taken from me, we have never been able to spend the holidays together as a family, and I never will again. Since June 22nd, 2013, my life has been turned upside down. I lost Destiny and Nevaeh and all my worldly possessions. I even lost my home. More than anything else, I lost Cherish in the most violent way possible. I will never get to see her grow up. I will never see her get married and enjoy life. He has taken that from me. And it can never be returned. I have so much rage. Inside of me because of what he did. I've never felt this much hatred in my life. I feel what happened has turned my family and friends against me. I see reminders daily of what he took from me. Every white van I see is a horrible reminder of what he did and how she suffered. Every school bus I see is a reminder of Cherish. Cherish loved riding the school bus. I would eagerly wait for her to come home to share her day with me. I feel the pain of losing Cherish every day. It's been 4 years and 9 months. But for me, it will always feel like yesterday and does. The devastation of losing Cherish has never left me, and it never will. I love you, Cherish.
just heartbreaking to listen to. That is Raina Periwinkle talking about her daughter, 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle, who she lost to that monster you saw there on the screen, Donald Smith, who is convicted of murdering that girl. But before he murdered her, he raped her. He took her in a van. He did all these horrible things to her. Carissa Kranz, hard case.
It is heartbreaking to watch, and that is the face of pure evil.
Sure is.
It seems like he is resigned to his fate.
So let me understand this. The jury recommended death. Why did they have to have another hearing? That's the hearing we just saw today.
So this is a Spencer hearing, which is an additional opportunity for the defense to put on evidence of mitigating factors to not put him on death row. It is unlikely that a judge will overturn a juror's discretion and decision to sentence him to death based on the fact that that jury was also the one that found him guilty. However, there is a little crinkle in Florida law. He was sentenced to death by the jury in 2013. At that time, it wasn't required to have a unanimous jury vote. In 2017, Florida law changed, and now it is required to have a unanimous jury verdict to sentence someone to death. In this case, I don't know if it was a unanimous jury or not, but the facts are so bad and so egregious.
By the way, it was a unanimous jury.
Okay, so I don't see the judge overturning what the jurors have done. It is just such an awful case, and he doesn't even want to put on any testimony to the contrary. He's resigned.
This was the Spencer hearing, and you just heard from the mother. Earlier we heard from the father. This happened just today in this really, really horrible case. It's one of the many things that we are tracking here at Law and Crime Live. And you can see there, that's Cherish Periwinkle, the little 8-year-old girl. It's just when we have these cases and you see the pictures of these victims, especially when they're so young and weren't able to defend themselves, it really just breaks your heart. And this is one of the cases that we're following today. Another big case, of course, if you've been watching the Law and Crime Network all day, you know we've been also following the murder trial. Tex McIver on trial for murder out of Fulton County, Georgia, will be live back in court. It's been a somewhat interesting day because we had an expert on the stand talking about the motivations and whether Tex would get richer if he offed his wife. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back in a few minutes. And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. We are following many cases here on the Law and Crime Network, including that hearing you just saw before the break involving Donald Smith, convicted of raping and murdering an 8-year-old little girl. We're also following another interesting case that just went down this week, the Leon Jacob case. A failed Houston doctor, Leon Jacob, facing life in prison in a murder-for-hire trial. Let's take a listen to a recap.
The sentencing phase began this week in the trial of Leon Jacob. Jacob was found guilty of 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder last week and faces the possibility of life in prison. Jacob and girlfriend Valerie McDaniel were arrested last March after they tried to hire a hitman to kill their former lovers, but the hitman turned out to be an undercover police officer. McDaniel killed herself shortly after her arrest. Prosecutors played audio recordings of calls placed by Jacob while in jail, including conversations with his mother.
Had you listened to me back in February, you wouldn't have been there at all. But you only have to do it your way. Julian, it's always been this way with you. You've got this big mouth, and you don't know when to shut it. You know, what I told you is what you've been charged with is worse than if you had actually done it yourself.
As well as recordings of Jacob bragging about his ability to sleep with a reporter.
So that reporter on ABC 13, Caitlin, she
Yeah.
comes here to see me every day. Yeah, she wants to sleep with me. She's really hot, actually. I mean, I know my wife's dead and I have to mourn her, but this one's cute.
Darren Gooden testified how Jacob had an affair with his wife and then threatened his safety.
I had some restraining orders I had to put in place. Following us around, sitting in front of the house, type deal. A couple threats. He threatened us, threatened to blow up my house, threatened to kill me.
Megan Veracos, one of the targets of the failed murder-for-hire plot, testified again about the abuse Jacob inflicted upon her.
And did he put his hand on your mouth?
Yes.
Did it hurt?
Yes.
Did it leave a mark?
Yes. I went to my vehicle, and at that point, he followed me outside. Our dog also followed me. The dog jumped in the car. At that point, I'd locked my doors and tried to back out, and he told me if I didn't give him the dog that he would punch the window in, and he kept slamming his fist against the driver's side window and pulling on the car handle.
Jacob's ex-wife, Annie Morrison, testified about the volatile nature of their relationship and how Jacob pulled a knife on her at one point and also threatened her.
I don't recall what the fight was about. I recall we were in our apartment, and he pulled out a pocket knife, is how I would describe it, where the blade flipped out, and he held it up. I don't recall what he said, but I recall feeling threatened by it and that he was threatening me with the knife.
The jury sentenced Leon Jacob to life in prison. This is Aaron Keller for the Law and Crime Network.
Wow. Okay, that is just a crazy story out of the Houston, Texas area. You got this guy convicted in a murder-for-hire plot to kill his ex-wife and his new lover's ex-husband.
Right.
It's like it's out of a movie.
It's out of a movie, and it was a really fast verdict as well that the jurors came down with. And what's really interesting is they have recordings of the mother in the jail telling him that he can't keep his mouth shut.
Yeah, leave it to the mom. Golda, she's on the jail recordings reaming out her son. We heard it there.
And he made it worse for himself by taking the stand. By him taking the stand, I think he thought he could explain himself to the jury in some way, but he just looked like more of a idiot. Exactly.
I mean, this guy thought he was pretty slick.
Yeah.
He thought he could pull one over us all, I guess.
I think he thinks, he's a doctor. So
a
failed doctor.
Yeah.
But he thought he could be smart enough to wiggle his way out of this one, just like he thought he could be smart enough to hire a hitman to kill off those in his way. And it didn't work out too well for him in this case.
It certainly didn't. But if you didn't know the conclusion of what happened here in the sentencing, I want to play something. This is Megan Veracos. She was one of the victims in this case that Leon apparently thought he had murdered, but he didn't because it was really an undercover officer that he was paying as a hitman. Let's take a listen to some of her testimony.
Please state your name for the record.
Megan Louise Veracos.
And Ms. Veracos, are you the same Megan Veracos that testified in the guilt phase of this trial?
Yes, I am.
I want to talk to you now about the aftermath of this. And I'd like for you to tell the jury how the actions of the defendant in this case have affected your life going forward from March of 2017.
I have no sense of trust. Just constantly afraid that something else is going to happen.
I'm sorry.
I have security throughout my home that I never had previously, just because I'm afraid somebody's going to break in or something's going to happen. So
I want to step back a little bit and let's talk about the night the assault occurred. Can you tell us what happened that night?
I came home from work, and Lee and I got in an argument over, he said he didn't like the way my face was, and had been yelling at me. So I had made a decision that I wasn't going to be spoken to like that anymore. So I tried to pack my things up and leave. At that point, he's screaming at me, calling me just awful names. And I went into our bathroom and just trying to get makeup and contacts, anything I could, because I wasn't sure how long I was going to be gone. And at that point, I was screaming because I knew the neighbors below us could hear. And I wanted them to call the police. I wanted them to hear what he was saying to me. And at that point, he put his hands over my face and told me to shut the up. And
let me stop you there. What kinds of things, you said you wanted the neighbors to hear what he was saying to you. What kinds of things was he saying to you while you were having this argument?
You know, go ahead and try and leave. It's just awful.
Did he make any threats to you about what he would do to you if you left him?
He had told me that he would burn the apartment down.
So when you're gathering your things up in the bathroom, is that when he approached you?
Yes.
And walk us through what he did when you're in the bathroom packing up your things.
I had a duffel bag on my shoulder, and he said, "Let me help you," and starts throwing things and pushing things into the bag. And then I started screaming, and he was like, shut up, you dumb shut up. Nobody's going to hear you.
And did he put his hand on your mouth?
Yes.
Did it hurt?
Yes.
Did it leave a mark?
Yes.
So what did you do in response to him grabbing your face?
I think I bit him and ran out of the house.
Where did you go?
I went to my vehicle, and at that point, he followed me outside. Our dog also followed me. The dog jumped in the car. At that point, I'd locked my doors and tried to back out, and he told me if I didn't give him the dog that he would punch the window in, and he kept slamming his fist against the driver's side window and pulling on the car handle.
Was he able to break the window?
No.
Did you think
I released the dog, and he took the dog.
Where did you go from there?
I stopped at the security gate of the apartment complex. Leon was on the speakerphone screaming, yelling, and I wanted the security guard to hear it. But I knew it would take too long for the police to get there. And my door wouldn't shut because he pulled on it so hard that the electronics wouldn't close. So I drove to his mom's house about a quarter of a mile away.
Why did you go to his mom's house?
Because I didn't have anybody else here, and I thought they cared about me.
Where is your family?
My family lives in Pittsburgh.
So your mom and dad, they live up in Pittsburgh? So
Yes.
You don't have any family here?
I do not.
What happened once you got over to Miss Jacobs' house?
Okay, you're just listening to Megan Veritas, who is the victim in the Leon Jacob case, and she's testifying to some of the abuse she faced at the hands of Leon Jacob. Really interesting stuff. We're going to hear more from her and go live into court in Tex McIver when we come back. And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. I'm your host, Rachel Stockman, and we are live in a courtroom in Atlanta, Georgia, in the murder trial of Tex McIver. And you can see Dean Driscoll. He's back on the stand. He's been on the stand for hours now. The jurors were able to have a very short lunch, and he's back on the stand testifying. He's actually a pretty important witness because he's talking about the finances of Tex McIver and how much Tex McIver stood to gain if Diane McIver died. Of course, he's saying it was an accidental shooting. Police investigators say it was on purpose, it was murder, and that Tex did it for the money. Let's take a listen to what's going on live in court.
Okay. His cash flow problems are not as bad when she is alive because she's giving him money.
I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question.
Which part?
Well, you say he has no ability to get to the cash. I mean, the 401k money was transferred into his name, so he would have had access to that.
Okay. And I'm saying set that aside. Set aside the life assurance. Set aside.
I didn't realize we were setting aside all of this thing.
Okay, I apologize for not being clear. Set that aside.
You're just talking about the 275.
Let me start over and see if I can do this in smaller pieces. You saw where for years, back to 2013, there was money going from Mrs. McIver to Mr. McIver.
Yes.
Okay. Every month? Or just a lot?
Here and there, yes.
Okay, here and there. So over the course of the whole year, there was money going from Mrs. McIver to Mr. McIver.
Yes.
She was giving him more money than he was giving back to her.
Yes.
typically. His sources of cash included those monies coming from Mrs. McIver.
Yes.
Okay. You showed us on one of your slides where, I think it was in September of 2016, without the money she gave him that month, he would have been negative $5,000.
Yes.
Okay? So my question is, set aside the life insurance, set aside the 401k, assume he can't control the cash that's in her estate. His cash flow problems are not as bad when his wife is alive and she's giving him money.
So the question is, if I eliminate the entire $1.2 million, assume he can't acquire a dime of that, is his cash flow worse? I mean, if his problem is worse, yes.
His problem is not as bad when his wife is alive.
Yes.
Okay.
Assuming all of those assumptions, yes.
You told us that the life insurance, there was a claim for it, but it had not actually been paid, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In other words, that $600,000 never made it into a bank account of Mr. McIver's.
To my knowledge, I have not seen a bank account where it's gone into, so I'm assuming that that's the same.
Whoa. Okay. So this is the prosecution's experts the prosecution was trying to prove that Tex McIver was worse off, but we had a pretty big bombshell that just happened there. We're going to talk about it when we come back. And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. We are live inside a courtroom in the Atlanta, Georgia area, watching every moment, every detail, everything that progresses in the Tex McIver murder trial. We have a guy by the name of Dean Driscoll on the stand. He's a financial expert called by the prosecution. Tex McIver facing murder charges for killing his millionaire wife. He says it was an accident. Investigators, police, prosecutors say it was murder, financial motive, and that money was the reason he did it. Okay, Carissa, we just had a moment in court where this expert admitted that that Tex relied on Diane on a monthly basis for cash flow. Therefore,
right,
would he be better off with her alive?
That was the bombshell yes that we just got.
With some assumptions.
And this was the state's witness. So that witness is paid by the prosecution to be there to have an opinion that would support the prosecution's case. So that was if the jury's paying attention, that was a very skilled cross-examination. And if you were watching closely, he was dodging the answer.
He kept dodging. He didn't want to say yes.
She kept having to rephrase it and re-ask it until we got that, whoa, yes. And then he had to follow up by saying, well, assuming everything else you just said is right. But the yes, which means she was more valuable to Tex McIver alive due to the cash flow and his access to her cash flow than dead. Because dead meant the funds had to go to pay liabilities, funds were frozen, he didn't have access.
He didn't have access to it right away.
He was an executor of the estate, which means he could execute it and be in control of it.
But he had obligations.
Obligations, and it didn't give him rights to just spend it as if it was his own money. So
Carissa,
that was key.
Very interesting development in this case that we are following live out of Atlanta. What we're going to do is continue. You can see it there live on the stand. Dean Driscoll still on the stand. We're going to continue to monitor it very closely. And if something happens in it that we want you to see, we're going to break right back into that live testimony. In the meantime, I want to take you inside another really interesting case that we've been following that all just went down this week. It's about a failed doctor, Leon Jacob, who was convicted of solicitation of capital murder for paying an undercover police officer that he thought was a hitman to kill his ex-girlfriend. That ex-girlfriend took the stand during sentencing. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
And then he also showed up at their home.
let's talk about that. When did he show up at the home?
I believe it was Friday evening.
And had you told him at that point that you didn't want contact with him?
Multiple times.
What did you tell him?
Not to talk to me, please leave me alone, we're done.
What made this the final straw for you?
I had sought therapy and I didn't want to live this life, and the fact that he put his hands on me, that was the last straw.
So that was the first time that he'd ever put his hands on you?
He had thrown things at me and screamed and yelled, but he had never physically put his hands on me.
Were you concerned that he might show up at their house?
Definitely.
And did he show up at their house?
Yes.
Tell the members of the jury what happened when he showed up at their house that night.
It was just Leslie and I and the baby, and basically Leon kept banging on the door. Eventually Leslie let him in, and I hid in a closet in their kitchen just to stay away from him because I was afraid of what would happen if he found me.
Could you hear the defendant in the house?
Yes.
What was he saying?
Where is that fuck?
Did he seem angry?
Yes.
What was your mind like? What are you thinking when you're hiding in this closet in the kitchen? What's going through your mind?
I hope he doesn't see my phone and my bag on the floor. What's going to happen if he finds me?
Did he eventually leave?
Yes.
So after he came to the house and he's looking for you and he's screaming, where do you go?
Leslie and I went upstairs and just tried to be calm. At that point, I knew I couldn't stay there anymore because he knew where I was.
So what did you do?
I left and went to work the next day and stayed at a hotel because he was still in my apartment and I still had no clothing and nothing else.
Did you at some point go back to your apartment?
I went back with police officers.
And were you able to get your things?
They had changed the locks on the apartment. At the time we walked in with the police officer, Leon had taken almost every piece of furniture that I owned. He hadn't touched my clothing, but he did. I found out that he had taken my passport and my eyeglasses.
You mentioned the furniture. Who purchased all the furniture?
I did. Half the furniture came from Pittsburgh and half the furniture was purchased from Ashley Furniture on a credit card in my name that I paid for.
And what did he do with all that furniture?
He put it on a truck and put it in a storage unit.
Did he let you have that furniture back?
He did not. He used that to try and get me to meet with him.
Tell us about that.
Basically, he kept telling me, you know, you'll have nothing. You can't afford this. What are you going to do? Just meet me and I'll give you the furniture back. Just talk to me and I'll give you the furniture back.
During this time period when all this is going on, is he continually texting you?
He is. Timeline-wise, I mean, I know that I changed my phone probably the Tuesday or Wednesday after all this happened. But throughout the weekend, he certainly wouldn't stop.
Did you work an event that weekend?
I did.
Tell me about the event that you worked that weekend.
A friend of ours, Vladimir, owns a catering company, and he had asked if I could help bartend. So I was to go to the location and just basically help them out. It was on a Saturday night. I originally wanted to cancel because of the relationship between Leon's family and Vladimir. But he said I would be okay and that he would protect me and nothing bad would happen if Leon showed up, that he would have him arrested.
During that time period, did the defendant try and contact you?
He contacted me, and I was working with an iPad that was Vladimir's, and he had called Vladimir so much I couldn't even use the iPad because Leon's name kept showing up on the iPad.
So you weren't able to do like transactions at the phone?
Correct.
You mentioned that you changed your number, so the assault took place on Thursday night, so by Tuesday that following week you had changed your phone number?
Yes.
Why did you change your phone number?
So that he couldn't contact me.
Did he use other people to try and contact you?
Yes. He called my work. He had Valerie call my work. He had a woman named Laura, I believe, show up at my work. He had his therapist call me. His mother called me. She didn't call my work, but he had anybody imaginable try and get in contact with me. People I didn't even know. He called my parents. He called my brother constantly. He called my friend Jen and left just voicemail.
Okay, you are listening to Megan Veritas. She is the victim in this really crazy case that we were following and that we are following out of Houston, Texas, involving a doctor who was convicted of solicitation of murder. She's testifying during the sentencing phase. Police investigators say he hired a hitman who was really an undercover police officer to try to get her killed. And take a look at what police staged to make it like he had really hired this hitman, at least make Leon Jacob think that. Okay, look at those photos. That's Megan Veritas. That's not real. She wasn't really tied up. Her mouth really wasn't put with that tape on it. Those are all staged, and that's the ex-husband of Leon Jacob's girlfriend who was also in on this plot. Wow, this is a crazy case.
It is crazy. It is completely crazy. Now, he was worried about losing his license before, and that's why he did solicitation of murder, because he felt like his ex was in his way for his medical career. Well, now it seems like he's lost his license for good.
Yeah, and what we were listening to is Megan going through the assault that she said she faced. And that really initiated the whole case, because she went to police saying she had been assaulted. And that's where prosecutors say the motivation came in. Right. They didn't want the case to go through, because if he got convicted of assault and stalking, he would lose his medical license.
Lose his medical license, right. So he made it worse for himself by then trying to stage or solicit and hire a hitman to off his ex, who's creating a hindrance for his career, which then made him completely lose his career. And the only career he could have now is possibly being a doctor in jail for other prisoners. And that wouldn't be a real career. It would just be him
jailhouse doctor. Well, that could be his next career. Okay,
yeah.
We're going to continue listening to some of that sentencing hearing. However, in the meantime, I want to take us back to Fulton County, Georgia, because we have that fascinating murder case that we've been following. It's going on live right now, the Tex McIver murder trial. We have an expert on the stand. There you can see him there having a little bit of a chuckle with the prosecutor. So here's what went down. He's been on the stand now. I'm looking at my watch. I think like 6 or 7 hours. But this is important testimony, because this goes into the motive of this case. Did Tex McIver have more to gain with his wife dead or not? Let's take a listen to what's going on in court. Alrighty, it looks like they're taking a little bit of a break there. If we hear testimony resuming, we'll go right back there. But let's talk about this witness, because he's been on the stand all day, Carissa. He's obviously important. Some of what he said is a little bit, detail-oriented, can get a little bit meticulous and monotonous for the jurors, especially when they, by the way, had to wait till 1:30 to have lunch. What do you make of his testimony overall? We've been dipping in and out of it.
The state spent hours and hours on direct examination. It was draconian and it was extreme. It was tiring. It was exhausting. We didn't really get anywhere. And then the defense.
If I'm a juror, I'm like falling asleep.
And then the defense on cross-examination in a very short period of time got him to admit that she was more valuable alive than dead, that her cash flow was more valuable.
Cash flow wise, but he still testified to the fact that he got $3.6 million upon her death. So, well, you know what? We're going to continue to follow this really interesting case out of the Fulton County, Georgia area. We're going to be live back in court following it, and other interesting developments in cases across the country, so you're going to want to stick with us. We'll be back in a few minutes.